Once again, we are the Brothers Mahoney. As always, I am Michael.
And I am James.
And tonight we are talking about the classic Who story, The Three Doctors.
Touted as the 10th anniversary of the show, even though it aired months in advance, this touted John Pertwee as the third Doctor, of course, along with bringing back Patrick Troughton, the second Doctor, and his last appearance in Doctor Who, and actually in acting overall, it brought back William Hartnell as the first Doctor, insofar as they could due to his health issues. It aired, the first episode, it was a 4-part serial. It started December 1972 and ended in January 1973 and was the beginning of the 10th season of Doctor Who.
And just to read the plot straight from the back of the DVD we own, which is the Three Doctors Special Edition. I forget when the first DVD came out in the USA. We have that one too.
But I think the first DVD in the USA came out 2001.
Oh God, yeah, and this one came out, looks like, on the back in 2012. So it's a Three Doctors Special Edition. The Time Lords are in crisis. A powerful force is draining their energy into a mysterious black hole, and they must recruit the Doctor to save them. But one Doctor isn't enough for this mission. All three of the Doctor's incarnations, aided by Joe Grant and Unit, must face the wrath of Omega, a fallen Time Lord trapped in a universe of antimatter, with one thing on his mind: revenge. This classic Who story, and classic not just as far as classic Who goes, but also classic overall, was written by Bob Baker and Dave Malden, and happens to be the first Doctor Who program that James and I ever saw.
Yeah, our father was a big fan of Doctor Who. He caught it in college, when he was at college here in the United States, in the late 70s it would have been. And he caught it on just some public access station. And so he got some of the VHSs when they came out. One of those VHSs, well, the only one I actually recollect, was the VHS of the Three Doctors.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how many times we saw it exactly when we were kids. I have to imagine at least twice, perhaps 3 times, because I have very vivid memories of watching it. Like this, a whole lot. Just watching this, there's a whole lot of nostalgic value that comes from it.
Yeah, watching it, I have a pretty good memory. So once I see something once, and suddenly if I see it twice, when we rewatched this, there were no surprises for me. I remembered, maybe not scene by scene or all the small conversational bits, but it was just nice seeing it all again. There's so much that I enjoy seeing in this story.
And of course, John Pertwee's stories can sometimes run a bit long, in my opinion, and I believe also in James's opinion.
No, I always need 7 episodes to tell one story. That's what I need in my life.
That is indeed what we need. But the Three Doctors, like James said, is just a 4-episode serial, so it's pretty digestible. And in addition, it helps that this story, as James said, brings back both Patrick Troughton and, in a limited role, William Hartnell. Of course, being the 2 Doctors who precede John Pertwee. And it's just, even though as kids, of course, we didn't have any experience seeing those serials, it was still nice to see those faces, and knowing what we know now about the Doctors, it's especially nice now seeing especially Patrick Troughton's interactions with John Pertwee.
The story had a lot going for it. It had a lot of just hilarious lines from characters. Troughton was great. Pertwee was great. The interactions were great. Joe was amusing. And honestly, I think the person who told the show, well, besides Omega, he was, of course, very good, but was the Brigadier, who was just, that's a true highlight of this story.
Yeah, I think my personal favorite Brigadier line. So, fun fact, this has to be the first time the Brigadier goes into the TARDIS.
And Sergeant Benton.
And indeed Mike Benton. So the Brigadier goes into the TARDIS, and he looks around, and his very first thought, talking to the Doctor, so this is what you've been doing with government funding.
Yeah, and he continues talking about his thoughts and illusion, nice practical effect. And it's just, because he's seen a lot of things with the Doctor, a lot of invasions, but he's never been the science guy. In fact, amusingly, in this episode, there's one of the very first scenes we see with him. The doctor asks, he wants to know if there's anything useful he can do, and so the doctor asks for a silicone rod. He passes a silicone rod his way, and the doctor just uses it to store his coffee. Yeah, that shows how much the Brigadier has to do with the science side of things.
Yeah, the Brigadier's character is always fun, and in this story, his mind gets pushed to realms unforetold. He just could not deal with a lot of what he had to deal with. In fact,
no.
Yeah, so we're not going to go a scene by scene or anything like that. But later on in the story, Brigadier, the Doctor,
both doctors,
Benton, Joe, pretty much all of them end up in this black hole of antimatter. And because the Brigadier is so like pig-hearted, he's like, "Oh, I'm fairly certain we're in chroma." He just has no open-mindedness to the possibility that he might not be quite where he thinks he is.
Yeah, he thinks that he might have gotten moved to outside of the country. And it was quite, as the doctor says, it's quite a bit farther than that. And he says, nonsense. I just don't want this to be overrun by holiday makers. Honestly, that entire scene, that first scene when they, it's the beginning of episode 3, is just golden because of how good the interactions the Brigadier has in his lines with, at this point, it would be the second doctor.
And of course, the Brigadier knows the second doctor as they first met up in the Wobble Fair and then again in the invasion.
Yeah, so of course he's also confused about how he's seen the second doctor when his interactions recently have been with the third doctor, which he blames on the doctor messing around with the TARDIS, which is great as usual.
It's also somewhat amusing that, of course, Benton also knew the second doctor, and Benton was probably a bit more pleased about seeing Troughton again than the Brigadier was.
And certainly more than the third doctor was.
Yeah, and I think that might be one of the highlights, aside from the Brigadier, it might be one of the highlights of this whole serial, just the interactions between the third doctor and the second doctor. I mean, if you've seen a third doctor story, you know he's a bit authoritative, he's a bit demanding, he can come off as a bit
demeaning.
Yeah, a bit demeaning. And the second doctor is, I don't know, he's very much he's probably one of the friendliest doctors, to be honest.
Yeah, he's friendly, he's generally light-hearted, except, when he has to deal with evil.
Yeah,
and
he gets along with people. I mean, just look at his friendship with Jamie. I just don't see the third doctor. I mean, the third doctor can have fun. It's not like he can't have fun, but it's a different type of dynamic between the third doctor and, be it Liz Shaw, Joe Grant, even Sarah Jane Smith, as opposed to the second doctor with Jamie or Zoe or Victoria. So when they get together, the personalities don't exactly mash up that well.
And it works out because the actors apparently didn't get along with each other either, John Pertwee and Patrick Troughton. Troughton liked to improvise his lines, according to what I've read, while Pertwee enjoyed, doing it straight from the script. And of course, if you have somebody improvising your lines, you can't then follow a direct script quote because the lines have been changed, so you don't know exactly where you are. And Pertwee did not quite enjoy that. So there were a couple of other problems between them. Eventually, they got on well enough, like I said before. And they actually became friends later on. But I mean, at that point, they've gone to, fan conventions. So eventually, over the time, they're going to probably become friends. Or close acquaintances, anyway.
It's sort of funny because it sort of fits with the personality of each doctor.
It really does.
Yeah, the second doctor, of course, is a bit more, lighthearted, playful. I mean, he's even more playful than Jamie a lot of the time. Whereas the third doctor has to stick up his ass a lot of the time he's on screen.
Yeah, sometimes it does seem like it. It reminds me, actually, at the very end of An Adventures in Time and Space, which was the, not documentary, but the drama made about the origins of Doctor Who. At the end, when William Hartnell's character is introduced who's supposed to be Patrick Troughton, William Hartnell says to Troughton, the character, that I told them there's only one man in the UK who could replace me. And Troughton replies, oh, really? Well, couldn't you find him? And that just completely fits in with everything I've seen from Troughton and really his doctor.
So throughout a lot of the serial, the Third Doctor and the Second Doctor are just bickering. I mean, part of it, the Third Doctor's annoyed that the Time Lords sort of intercepted his time stream to send him help from his previous lives, which is, if you're wondering, that's where the Second Doctor arises from.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's funny. It might even be worse than that. It's not like the show got terribly psychological in the classic era, but it was the Time Lords who forced the regeneration on the Third Doctor. So he's literally being forced to look at the person he could have been, except for the Time Lords forcing the regeneration.
And actually, you would think that would also make Troughton angry if Troughton had any idea that's how he became the Third Doctor.
Yeah, when you see Troughton get picked up, it's not very clear what he was doing. There's no one around him at the time. It looked like he was running away from some explosions. I'm sure it's been placed exactly where that happened, but it's not quite clear in the story.
Of course, the Fourth Doctor is also in this serial of, it's called the Three Doctors. You would expect our three. But William Hartnell's health was never really that great for a lot of the time he was on Doctor Who as the Fourth Doctor. I mean, if you remember, he left the show, and he didn't necessarily want to leave the show, but his health was just sort of failing at that time. In fact, the 10th Planet, which is William Hartnell's final story, there's almost an entire episode when he's just out of action. I think he's just lying on a cot because he wasn't really able to do much. So he is in the Three Doctors, and the excuse is that the Time Lords tried to get him to the Third and Second Doctor, but he's sort of trapped in a time continuum type thing. I believe he calls it like a time addy. It looks like sort of a black diamond type thing, and he is not able to actually get to the Third and Second Doctor. But he is able to pop up on the TARDIS Skane a couple of times. It's Skane, so he calls it Skane. It's a classy Smuggler's reference. He is able, though, to reach them on the Skane and give them advice. And somewhat amusingly, he doesn't seem to care much for either the John Pertwee or Patrick Troughton Doctor either, leading to, of course, the famous line, these are my replacements, a dandy and a clown. And just seeing John Pertwee's face fall always cracks me up.
Honestly, for me, it's Patrick Troughton's face that's even the funnier between the two. Because, he's just, smiling. He's so happy to see his film himself. But after that line, his face completely does a 180. It's great.
And it's funny, Troughton apparently has a deep respect for the Fourth Doctor. I mean, they are the same people, so it's so strange saying it that way. But he has a deep respect for his previous incarnation, probably seeing him as like the wise old man that he so often was portrayed as in the Fourth Doctor's tenure. And it's just nice to see. Of course, the bickering between the Third and Second Doctor eventually gets sort of pushed under the rug and they're able to work together. But it is especially funny when they're trying to face down Omega, and the Second Doctor is just making a fool of himself. He has a specific reason. That's the thing about the Second Doctor. A lot of times he's acting like a clown and a fool, but he has a reason for it. And the Third Doctor's like, how are you doing? Well, he didn't phrase it like this, but the gist of it was, what are you doing? Don't piss this guy off. And the Second Doctor's like, well, you sort of need to piss him off to see how he reacts to it. So it's just nice to see these interactions. It's nice to see them, despite their different personalities, eventually be able to work together.
Yeah, because I think both Doctors would have been able to deal with Omega, but they would have done it certainly in their own ways. The Third Doctor would never have tried to do half the things the Second Doctor did, and the Second Doctor would not have been very well respected by Omega if he was there alone. There's a great line from Omega where he says he's talking to the Third Doctor, and Omega's asking the Third Doctor if the Third Doctor saw that Troughton and he are of the same intelligence.
And it's actually the same vice versa. There's a lot of things the Third Doctor does that the Second Doctor would never do. Of course, the Third Doctor is known for sort of being almost like the James Bond of Doctor Who for a lot of really good reasons. Plenty of action sequences permeate John Pertwee's time as the Doctor. And even in the Three Doctors, this is a scene in which they go to the dark side of Omega's mind, and it's sort of like Omega versus the Third Doctor, and sort of like a trippy void type scene, slow motion. It's a very trippy sequence. And you see, of course, the Third Doctor get into, believe it or not, a physical confrontation with someone else because he never
I
did
would
that
not
before.
have believed it.
Yeah. Can you imagine if that had been the Second Doctor getting to the dark side of the mind with Omega?
Yeah, I can't remember every. Well, one, there's some Second Doctor stories we've not listened to. Some, the ones, he has still a few that are lost, and we've not actually listened to those recordings, but I can't remember him getting terribly physical with anybody. I know there was some type of confrontation at the end of the Army of the Warlord, but I doubt the Doctor actually threw a punch. Maybe he did, though. I might be wrong.
I also think another thing that really helps the three Doctors is that Omega makes such a compelling antagonist.
Yeah, he's played by an actor I don't really recognize as Stephen Thorne. It's a cool name, though. But yeah, he has a lot of great quotes. He has a very commanding voice, which is very good for his sake, considering what we found out about him. Yeah, he doesn't really do anything until we see him properly in episode 3. But he is just, when he shows up, he's an amazing presence, and he really works well pit against the third and second Doctors.
Yeah, as the plot on the back of the DVD backside, he is described as, quote, a fallen Time Lord trapped in the universe of antimatter, and that's not entirely his own doing, and he feels somewhat betrayed by the Time Lords because of the fact that he's trapped here. I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to say that Time Lord history is something I am not exactly an expert of. I know the names like Rosalind and Omega and the quote-unquote the Other, which is always a fun one. But I've not read such esoteric novels like Longborough, and I'm just not I'm not an expert in Time Lord lore. But it is interesting the drops and dribbles we get from the classic series about this stuff.
And it does lead to a pretty good line when the third Doctor's telling Omega that, hey, our people see you as a hero, just trying to sort of I'm sure they do see him as a hero, trying to placate him. And Omega's response is, a hero? I should have been a god.
Yeah, he's a bit heavy-handed, but it works well. And one of the more amusing lines was, I think the third Doctor suggested that they could try to get Omega out of he's right now trapped in a dimension of antimatter. The third Doctor suggests getting him out of the dimension, and then so he can resume his seat in the High Council. After Omega has literally created an entire warlord out of pure will, he thinks he's going to be content on just a seat on the council.
And I mean, not only did, of course, Omega create the entire world, he also created some of my favorite personal creatures of Classic Who, being, I'm not even sure how you describe them, just the antimatter creatures that we see in the first couple of episodes of the serial.
Yeah, there's the very classic blob-like effect that, enjoys the drain pipes, that eats Bassi and the like. By the way, I hope you're not listening to this without having seen the story, or else this is going to be so disjointed for you. So there's that effect, which is obviously just something done after they said everything, and just some computer effect. And then there are these great, how do you describe them? These green-brown bubble wrap kind of creatures with a claw that just shoot blasts of fire at people, who pop up and do a pretty good assault on the unit headquarters. They pop out of nowhere. They have no idea that they're coming. They pop out of nowhere, and they just have to fight for their lives to defend the unit base. And it's really good. It's maybe not the most tense scene, but it's really cool to just see them getting overwhelmed by these creatures out of nowhere.
And they also pop up a decent amount in the last couple of episodes while on the planet made of antimatter that Omega controls.
Yeah, they're basically his personal guards.
Yeah, I think they have a very interesting look to it and very memorable. I mean, like I said, we saw this when we were kids, and they have such a striking look to them.
Yeah, I've never quite forgotten them. I can promise that.
Another somewhat interesting thing about this is, since it sort of focuses on an attack on Gallifrey by Omega, we do see some Time Lord action going on here.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the Time Lords that we see before the Deadly Assassin are now for the they never seem to quite be the same strata, because in the Deadly Assassin and all the ones after that, they have that very recognizable, I don't even know if there's a name for it, that neck thing.
Yeah, they look extraordinarily ornate.
Yeah, they're ornate. They tend to be pompous. I believe at one point calls them a bunch of dusty politicians. But the ones we see in the war games and in this one, and I believe we see a bit of them in, was it Colony in Space?
I do believe so.
They're not weighing anything half as ornate. And the ones that we see here, it's quite interesting. We see 2 Time Lords in this story who we also supposedly saw in the war games at the tribunal, who decided to exile the second Doctor. Now, I don't think either of them were played by the same actor, but they're Time Lords, they don't need to be for them to be the same character. And it's Doctor Who canon, so some extended media says, oh, one person was here. Some claim that Garth was here and Garth later shows up in the Deadly Assassin. And some say, oh, it was the Time Lord President who passed the sentence officially, which makes more personal sense to me. But on the other hand, I could see the President not lowering himself to a small tribunal. So you could really take it either way, but that's how Doctor Who canon basically works. Yeah, so the 2 Time Lords you see arguing back and forth. One is a Chancellor, one is the Time Lord President, who is most likely the same president who later gets assassinated in The Deadly Assassin. And I believe the President has a great line that, oh, the law will be upheld, but not right now. Because according to the Chancellor, it breaks the law to have 2 regenerations of the same Time Lord at the same time. And he gets a very persnickety about that law, even though they're under attack by forces they have no idea how to fight. But that's the Time Lords for you.
And it also gives a little more background on Time Lord, I guess, well, just the Time Lords in general, because, like James said, they haven't really appeared that much up to this point, aside from the war games and Colony in Space.
Which we've only seen once, admittedly.
Yeah, I actually don't remember almost anything about Colony in Space.
I remember liking it, but I don't remember much more than that.
So the Time Lords haven't really appeared much, so they're still sort of working on the history as we know it. So there's even like a reference to a time travel facility, and how apparently Time Lords are pledged to protect, they might have said, lower life forms or something along those lines, neither of which really jive with what we know about the Time Lords later on.
It was quite strange, especially because, the Time Lords that I'm mostly familiar with are during the Tom Baker era, where they're pledged, where they quote-unquote are pledged to non-interference, which is also, to be fair, what they were getting the second Doctor for in the war games. So I'm not sure where this protection comes from. I believe it probably comes from the invasion of time. I'm sure there's an easy explanation for it. It might be one of those strange things. Oh, we don't interfere, but we protect and keep the peace in a certain part of the galaxy or whatnot. Basically, the Time Lords, what they say goes when it comes to how to interpret their laws. And that's how they like it too.
And circling back to Omega, I do want to give special props again. Very good actor, and his use of voice was just fantastic. It helps. He's pretty sympathetic despite his actions. I still think he's a rather sympathetic antagonist.
Yeah, I felt very bad for him. He was in an unwinnable situation.
Yeah, and in the final episode, he gives a very, very good performance. When he finds out something that may not be going his way, his solution is to destroy all things. And he's just, at this point, shouting and wailing, and he's just shouting, all things! All things! And it's just wonderful. I don't know how I use it as often as I do in conversation, but I do.
Yeah, it just slipped into our vernacular because, I mean, you see the performance, and I mean, I guess it depends on what age you see it. I haven't forgotten the performance because he finds out something completely horrifying that he can't help, and he's wailing. He has literally, at this point, no chance. And so he just has a complete breakdown, and it's wonderful to behold.
There are also a couple of smaller elements about the story that I always appreciated. Jo doesn't really have that much to do here. She's really, I mean, you could count the Brigadier and maybe Benton as a companion, maybe. But, of course, Jo's the companion at this point in time, and she doesn't really have that much to do here aside from bringing people who has either coffee or tea. Actually, that's her very first scene, which I found, from a modern-day perspective, somewhat traveling.
I mean, she is the Doctor's assistant. And she's, to be fair, she's not a science assistant like Liz Saha.
Yeah, but Jo is still nice. I think she has a little more to do in the first episode than she does many of the others.
Once Troughton gets here, once the Brigadier is actually in the TARDIS, she doesn't have too much to do except interact with a side character who we meet during the story.
Though I do like Joe's interactions with the second Doctor and the extraordinarily butchered explanation of trying to explain who each other is. With the
But
third Doctor,
to be fair, it doesn't help that they didn't have the term regeneration yet in the
Yeah.
show lexicon.
yeah. So of course the third Doctor, and apparently he thinks it's useful. But speaking to Joe, he says, "I am he, and he is me."
And amazingly, that doesn't do enough for Joe. And of course, the way that he says it is again in his more authoritative way. And then Pertwee, I'm sorry, and then Troughton comes in and says, no, you're confusing here. It's really very simple, Joe. Talking to her nice and kindly. It's just a nice dichotomy between the difference between the two.
Of course, the Brigadier, once he actually meets both of them, it's like, "Oh, I didn't know when I was well off."
Yeah, but I don't remember. I think that was near the end when when he sees. It takes the Brigadier a while to actually see both of them at the same time. But when he does, that's his line that he didn't know when he was at well off, which is hilarious. Again, the Brigadier is great in this episode. And of course, this is the episode that originates, and it's been used a lot of times since. The Pertwee is, I've done this every time. Troughton is the one who says it originally. When he sees the third Doctor's new TARDIS, he looks around and he says, "Oh, you've redesigned. I don't like it." And that's been repeated again and again and again. And even the 11th Doctor said it to Craig. So that's just one of those Doctor Who memes that's still running.
Oh, and actually related to that, now this is not the first time this has happened in Doctor Who, but Patrick Troughton actually offered the character a jolly baby, which I thought was somewhat amusing, given that's one of the traits commonly connected with Tom Baker's Doctor later on.
Yeah, it's just one of those random things. I don't know if maybe if Tom Baker remembered that and wanted to put it into his repertoire. That's always possible with how Tom Baker did his portrayal. But either way, it's nice to see a little hint of what's to come. And that will be happening a lot in the future.
And actually, another thing, this is a small thing, but I still think it stood out, especially watching this again. And it has been a little while since we've seen this last. But there is some segments with the second Doctor, of course, who enjoys playing on a recorder that he has. It's a pipe about this long with some horse in it, as he explains to Omega.
Omega did not appreciate that, by the way.
So he lost track of it. So he's trying to find his recorder. He asks the third Doctor, he asks the Brigadier, can't find it. And it's actually some decent foreshadowing for a scene in the final episode, which I actually, to be honest, I sort of forgot about. So it's nice to see that foreshadowing sort of thrown in there.
Yeah, actually a story relevance, which, I mean, it's, a 4-part episode, 4-part story. So, of course, they're going to, have hints of what's, how it's going to conclude. But I thought it was a rather nice conclusion, all things considered. Especially when it really could have just been the second Doctor, blathering on about, wanting his recorder.
And another thing I've always appreciated is the cliffhanger to episode 2. And just to set this scene up, that blob type thing we mentioned earlier, which sort of pops up from Jane's, when it touches something or someone, they sort of get transported to this universe made of antimatter. And the second Doctor and some others are hiding in the TARDIS. This creature is outside the TARDIS. And at the end of the episode, they put down the force fields of the TARDIS. And then what we see it from the Searcher's perspective outside. Of course, this is unit base. They're looking at this building, and then next second, boom, it's gone. And then we go to the Hall of Unit Headquarters, sort of flying into the black hole. And it has to be some of the most beautiful special effects I've seen in my many years.
It's hilarious how it's shown on screen.
I mean, that's a true banger of a cliffhanger.
Yeah, it is. Well, it's memorable. I can assume it's probably going to be coming in next week after you see that, certainly. But yeah, before we get to our final thoughts on the story, I just want to do a quick look over on where the story fits on the personal timelines of the Doctor.
And of course, this information comes, as it always does, from the TARDIS Wiki, which is a really nice resource. And unfortunately, we are not getting paid to promote it.
It would be nice, but alas, people should use it anyway, whether we get paid or not, certainly. The reason for this segment is mostly because I think it's a really fun idea. Doctor Who has existed for now almost 60 years. There's books, there's video games, not many video games to be fair. There's a whole 20 plus year of Big Finish audio. There's some BBC audio. There's the new series that, has new events take place. And there's just a whole plethora of media out there. And, Doctor Who does exist in one universe. So I just think it's, a fun way to spend time to look into where stories fit. And again, as Margot said, this is from the TARDIS Wiki. And they have a personal theory timeline for each Doctor. So for the first Doctor, he's of course trapped in a time Addy, and that seems to be taking place when it comes to the classic series between the Time Adler and Galaxy Fall, which is, a fun enough place. And at that time, he has Steven as a companion. And who, do you remember who his other companion is at this time? Was it Dodo?
Actually, I think it's Vicky.
Well, Dodo, Vicky, kind of the same. I'm not really, there's so much mini stories missing from that era. I have to admit, I do kind of confuse the two. So that's fine. I guess it's Vicky. I'll take your word for it. But yeah, so it takes place between the Time Adler and Galaxy Fall, and more specifically, not getting into the comic books or anything, but there's a 2007 audio story called Frostfire, and this takes place, according to the timeline, after Frostfire and before a 1995 novel from the Virgin Mission Adventures. Virgin published Doctor Who novels before the BBC took over, was it?
Indeed.
Yeah, so they published Doctor Who novels, and the Mission Adventures line had previous Doctors, and this novel was The Empire of Glass, which really sounds fascinating. We don't have any Virgin Mission Adventure novels yet, but I think they're the most interesting novels Doctor Who-wise to look forward to in the future. The second Doctor is rather simple. It takes place between the invasion and the Troughton. The invasion, of course, being previously mentioned in this episode, because that's when the Brigadier first mentioned that unit exists to the Doctor, which is, very important in Doctor Who history. And that's, of course, a rather long story, but they had great Cybermen scenes in it, so it's probably worth its while. And more specifically, there was a early advanced source Big Finish audio entitled The Wreck of the Warlord from December 2017. The second Doctor story takes place in between that and a Talos novella entitled Foreign Davos from 2002. Now, the Talos novellas look fascinating and yet rather confusing, so I'm not very well versed in them, but apparently they're canon enough. So
it's also worth mentioning that the Talos novellas are probably exceptionally expensive, so they should be fun to purchase.
Yeah, they're expensive and rare. Well, I guess they go hand in hand. And finally, of course, this is, just following the timeline. This is the two Doctors. It takes place in between the Time Monster and Carnival of Monsters. And of course, at the end of this story, the Doctor is freed from his exile. He is given memory of the rematerialization codes, and he's able to use his TARDIS fully. And we see then the Carnival of Monsters. To get more specific, annoyingly, however, there was a BBC Past Doctor Adventures book from April 2000 entitled Fordragis, which takes place right before this in the third Doctor's timeline, and right after this, before we get the Plazas of Carnival of Monsters, which had some charm to it, was a companion chronicles that came out 2013, The Courtseas, which is certainly not the best name I've ever heard, but I'm sure it'll be fun enough.
And if you're confused about the difference between the different book lines and the different Big Finish audio lines, be it companion, be it short trips, yeah, just join the club, Raz. There's a lot of material here, and it sometimes takes a bit to parse through all of it. And in fact, in many aspects, I'm still learning a lot of this stuff, especially about the Big Finish side of things. I have a decent hang on the books now, but there's a lot of things to learn about the audio side of the Doctor Who universe.
Yeah, again, the universe has been going on for so long, they could make audio stories out of really anything.
And they pretty much have.
Well, they have, and they could keep doing it. Yeah, they really could make audio things out of anything. I mean, for example, in Spare from Space, near the end of the story, this would be the first, of course, John Pertwee story. There are Oughton attacks on different bases, police stations, barracks, communication centers all around the UK. If they wanted to, if they ever, decided what the hell, they could make, a small little, 4-episode audio thing on one of these bases being attacked. Now, it might not, be the place most ripe for an audio story, but they easily could. I mean, that did happen in the Doctor Who universe, so...
A 3-part Attack of the Oughton serial sounds sort of fun to me.
Yeah, anything with the Oughton. I've always had a special place in my heart for the Oughton, but alas, this is about Omega and the antimatter monsters, not so much the Oughton. We can save them for another time. But overall, I really enjoy the 3 Doctors. Again, a lot of it's going to be nostalgia, but nostalgia exists, and it matters, and you can't change how something makes you feel. And I just have always liked this story. It's really fun. It's only 4 episodes, so for a John Pertwee story, it's very digestible. It's quick, and just the fun that the second Doctor's having with Troughton enjoying his time being back, that Brigadier, every other line being just hilarious, the hamminess that's perfect from Omega. I think it's a great story of classic Who.
Yeah, so I really enjoy the 3 Doctors for a lot of reasons, and I would highly recommend it. If you don't have much experience with classic Who, you might want to gravitate toward Tom Baker, but this is another really good story that you could gravitate toward. I think it's definitely worth watching, and I give it a 2 thumbs up from the Michael.
And on the next Brothers Mahoney discussion, we will be discussing The End of the Warlord, the second episode of the Reviver series in 2005, written by Russell T. Davies.
I'm Michael.
And I'm James.
We are the Brothers Mahoney. If you've been watching, we hope you enjoyed, and have a nice night.